Hello, my name is Amaury Daniel Santos, and I am the Valuable Advisory Member to the Transition Working Group, working as Director of Programs at Continuing Education at Princeton Theological Seminary.
And I'm Carl Wilton, a State Clerk of the Presbytery of Monmouth.
So, of course, not only having a clear vision and an idea of the mission that we're called to be together, but as Presbyterians as we are, we also need a good sense of how all this is going to be ordered together, because we are not Congregationalists, we are Baptists after all, right? We are Presbyterians after all. Exactly. We are not that. So, as we came together to figure out how we wanted to come how to order all this, not only to fulfill the expectations of the Book of Order and the new form of government that has been put before us, and also not feeling anxious about all the discussions that we know are being had and will be had in the next General Assembly, we started thinking of ways in which to be more effective in what we do. And we had considerable discussion not only within the group, but also with presbyteries that were the presbytery and presbytery leaders that we were able to engage in understanding what is it the Synod is called to do and what is it that presbyteries are called to do in order to enhance what these two areas of mid-governance in our denomination are called and expected to be. And there were 7 principles, more than changes. I would like us to see them as principles that came forth to understand how is it that the Synod is proposed to be ordered as, in order to fulfill this mission and vision idea of being a community of mission, and being a community together. And those 7 proposals and principles are that we move the Synod governance of the Synod Assembly 2 years in order to reduce its functions, but not only to move its governance for every 2 years, but we also understand the intentionality of being committed together. That doesn't mean that we'll meet as a Synod only once every 2 years, but we will meet in the off year in a big tent kind of event in which we will showcase the initiatives and ministries of congregations and presbyteries that are being had and enhanced by the Synod. As a third principle, we would ask to restructure the membership of the Synod to include representatives from each presbytery, and that will be intentionally in order to value and to understand and to have within our midst all that's going on in the presbyteries as part of the decision-making process. Advisory members of the Synod that will be had in the Synod Council to include youth and women and racial ethnic caucus representation. Membership in the Synod Council, and this is one of those things that we heard often, particularly as we spoke to underrepresented groups within the Synod. Membership in the Synod Council will be open to active members of Synod presbyteries and congregations. And we'll have a deeper conversation about that later to understand what does that mean. But the idea is to open the decision-making process within the Synod, not only to ruling and teaching elders, but also to other leaders within our presbyteries or congregations that are doing significant work in our congregations and our presbyteries, and that the Synod might be benefited by their voice in that decision-making.
Okay, at the beginning of this section, it speaks of reducing by approximately 50% the human hours and energy required for governance work. To put that in the context of the Book of Order, that means that this is a proposal for transferring the Synod into the status of reduced function Synod, as described in the new form of government. What Amaury has described as some of the particulars of how that would be carried out. And there are 2 ways one could do that. One could simply say, well, we don't really need much Synod stuff. Let's just kind of turn off the lights and do the minimal amount of Synod-type business that we need to do, and just leave the presbyteries to fend for themselves apart from that. There's another way to do it, however, which recognizes that there are significant ministries that go beyond presbytery borders within our region, and the Synod is also blessed with significant financial resources that can be used to fund meaningful ministry. And so we're choosing to go with that second course of action, developing ways of not so much legislative action, but of carrying out mission within the bounds of the Synod. And that's really carried out in the whole networking area that will be described in a moment. But I did want to make it clear that this is the reduced function model. Now I would ask you to turn to page 14, because this is still a part of governance, but ends up a little bit later in the document. Okay, we'll get that on the page as well, or on the screen as well, page 14. That's a little bit. The paragraph. This paragraph supporting presbyteries that we're looking at. Some may wonder, because there's not so much mention of presbyteries, except for this paragraph, that where do presbyteries fit into this whole plan? In fact, the work of supporting presbyteries is part of the entire process. Yes, the Synod has some rather minimal judicial governance functions to do on the Synod level, but really what we're here for is to serve Jesus Christ, and as a way of doing that, to serve the presbyteries who are also doing the work of Christ. And so we see that this whole process is to empower and enable the presbyteries to do their work even better in the future. We are aware, as it says here, that presbyteries are in a time of transition. We're aware of the membership losses that have occurred within the denomination, the downsizing of the church, or perhaps some might say the right-sizing. But the presbyteries, many of them are half the size they were at their inception. And we all know from our life in our presbyteries that there's been an impact on presbytery life, presbytery work, presbytery staffing, and many are questioning whether the current boundaries and size of presbyteries are appropriate to move further into this new century. And so there's a provision in here that's still kind of just sketched out in general terms, because the actual implementation is for later, asking that there be funds allocating the budget for 2014 and beyond to engage in some consultations, some conversations, some work within and among the presbyteries on how presbyteries may work better together. We know that firsthand in our neck of the woods, where I'm from, in Monmouth Presbytery, because we are sharing a regional presbyter, as we call her, Wendy Bailey, with the Presbytery of New Brunswick. This is one of just a few places around the country where this staffing model has been in place, and we're kind of living into it and living through it. We're also aware that there have been consultations and conversations going on among some of the presbyteries of the Synod. In particular, the three New England presbyteries have been having some consultations about how they might work better together. So there are many, many possibilities, creative possibilities, for how presbyteries with the smaller size and smaller resources might work together. There's also the question of boundaries, whether there might be some call for discussion of the adequacy of current presbytery boundaries. There are complicating factors with that, especially if you're talking about merging presbyteries having to do with General Assembly voting on overtures. But there may be ways of dealing with some of these needs, staffing and missional needs, in ways other than simply a straight merger of presbyteries. So all this is just out there for creative potentiality. We think that this new structure will enable that kind of conversation to happen.
And finally, the reduced function of that is being proposed to you does not mean that there's going to be reduced work. The work, actually, if you look at the document, it might be significantly increased, and happily so. But the way that's going to be manifested is that not only are we going to expect that the Synod Council will meet regularly, but expecting and hoping that every presbytery will send representation to the Synod Council, we would hope that the presbyteries are continually engaged in the work of the Synod. And the Council work will be divided in three broad areas that are described on the document, pages 8 through 11. One of them will be trustees, which will basically respond to the legal requirements of New York State law, where we are incorporated networks review, which will work in the creation and the putting forward of these new passions and information throughout the Synod, and Synod mission, which would guide the Synod in understanding what is the regional works that we are doing together. Finally, to let you all that the mission, vision, and governance aspects and all the details that are being set forward in this document are hopefully made available to all the congregations and presbyteries in three of the most spoken languages throughout the Synod. There are certainly in English, which I'm assuming is the one you're reading from, but it's also available in Spanish and in Korean. So I would hope that not only throughout this meeting, those are available on the Synod website, synodne.org, but that you would also make those available to your presbyterian congregational leadership to better understand in perhaps their native tongue. Thank you.
One other word on the Synod Council itself. Many of you are aware that we probably need to find a new name for the Synod Council, because the new form of government uses council as a generic term, as we used to use the word governing body. We're kind of open to suggestions on that, so if any of you have any, please let us know. whether it's going to be a mission agency, which is the terminology adopted by the General Assembly, or something else. So we continue to use the word Synod Council, so you know what we're talking about. Thank you.